everyone. Welcome to Voices of Customer Experience. I'm your host, Crystal Garrett, and co-hosting with me today is the CMO of Worthix, Mary Drumond.
Hi, Crystal. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing great. Good to have you too. Our special guest today is the Principal Analyst of Digital Insight at Adobe, Tamara Gaffney. Tamara has created a new program for Adobe, the Experience Index, which focuses on measuring customer expectations and business impact of the experience-led business. Her long history in the technology industry and ability to interpret big data analysis has enabled her to identify key trends. She's been quoted on television, radio, and in thousands of press articles where she's established a track record of accurately predicting the future of digital experiences. She's also been named one of the top 20 big data analysts in the US by Fortune magazine and one of the top 100 data influencers in the UK by Data IQ magazine. Tamara describes herself as an authentically outspoken, bold futurist with a love for big data who is passionate about changing consumer experiences. Thank you so much for calling in, Tamara.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so Tamara, let's start with the Experience Index. First of all, tell us how you came up with the concept of the Experience Index.
Well, it seems to me, after thinking it through, that we're on a very similar journey between Mary and I, which is that we have come to realize that we can't just use the traditional way of measuring how customers feel about their interactions. We are now at a place where everything is digital or at least touches digital in some way. We carry our phone around with us constantly. So, the idea that we're out of digital contact is, frankly, only when we want to be.
Right.
And we're choosing to leave it behind.
That's right.
But other than that, everything has that potential. And so at Adobe, we have been talking about being an experience-led business as one of the most important things that we can suggest to marketers that they focus on. And as a part of all of that, we realized that we just didn't have a lot of meat on the bone. We would say these things, we would look at research studies that would proclaim how much ROI you'd get and all of that stuff, but we weren't really telling our customers as part of our customer experience for them, what do you got to do? What's first? Or how big a deal is it? In which ways? And so that was why we decided to launch the Experience Index, which is a program that is brand new, hot off the presses, and is intended to help us to provide not only the direction of go be an experience-led business, but much more about what kind of path do you need to take to get there, and really help businesses much more so than large, platforms and platitudes.
So you said you collected like 1,500 responses, is that correct?
We did. We did for the United States, and that was launched in March. And then we also collected over 1,000 responses each from India, Japan, UK, France, and Germany. Those various findings were just released over the course of the last couple of weeks. And we also did another study, which hasn't been released yet, of businesses to try and draw some comparisons between what consumers say they expect and what businesses are working on.
Well, my main question is all of these responses that you're gathering, I imagine that these are customers that directly interact with Adobe. So they're all Adobe's customers from your customer databases, from your CRM users of which ones of Adobe's platforms or all. Is there a specific segment that you guys focused on to get these responses?
Actually, no. The Experience Index is built to be a broad-based consumer research program. So my past background in history was in building research programs at Nielsen Media Research. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm intending to do is to help benchmark what consumers' expectations are in a much more general sense. So this is not a study of consumers of Adobe, Photoshop or Adobe Acrobat or our Experience Cloud, which is obviously, why we're leaning in on Experience, because we have a whole technology side of our company that is designed towards improving customer experience. But what we did was we went out and surveyed a broad population. So this is 18 plus and must have one qualifying device, which would be most likely a smartphone, in order to come into the sample.
Mm-hmm. A recurring complaint that we always get, I mean, we had that even in our initial trailer for the podcast, and we hear it all the time with customers and even on forums and different customer experience platforms, where not only analysts, but executives, everyone who's actually on the battlefront of CX, talking about how the amount of data is endless. There's just so much. So to collect 1,500 responses, I can't even imagine how many people you had to survey. And so when collecting this data, what do you do so that you don't get drowned in that ocean of data? How are you able to identify the most valuable insights and pinpoint the stuff that you can actually act upon?
That's a great question. And let me go back in time a little bit, because most of my journey towards this program today has been built in big data analysis. So I was one of the founding leaders of a program at Adobe we called Adobe Digital Insights, which utilized web traffic data to build huge predictive models and determine e-commerce spending and mobile future and advertising, social media, and all kinds of big stuff. And I got the same question there. And in fact, to me, 1,500 is kind of small data.
Mm-hmm.
That's how when I think of it, if it's anything less than a few trillion transactions, it's kind of small. But the point that you're making is valid no matter what you're looking at in terms of research. And that is, how do you get beyond the obvious and find the insights? And that is it's really one of those places where, and this is a place that Adobe talks about a lot, the intersection of art and science. This is what we would call data artistry, okay? This is where we take data, we work with data, and I'm not trying to say that it's not scientific, because we have scientists, but we also have artists. And I actually am one of those people who's a data artist. I look at data and I see patterns. I see a vision of what it means and correlations that aren't necessarily obvious, but are things that once I suggest to an analyst that they dig into, they usually find something interesting.
Nice.
I would say that I'm trying to figure out, how do I turn a scientist into an artist? And I'm not sure yet you can.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes a village.
Right.
I think it really does take a bunch of different skill sets, not the least of which is journalism and storytelling, which you hear a lot about. But I want to say that not from the, like I said, large platitude perspective, but from the perspective of, we're looking for the threads that we can pull together towards a decision or a strategy outcome or some sort of future return as a business person. And it's not just enough to look at a bunch of dashboards every week and think you're going to change anything.
Sure.
And that goes for customer experience dashboards, it goes for analytical dashboards, anything like that. We have to have the people in place who have the vision to look at that data and say, wait a minute, something here is weird, or something here is pretty cool, and I'm going to dig into it. So that's a long answer, but the reality of what we've done here is had me and an analyst churning through data, looking at it with an eye towards what about it is going to be interesting, or what about it helps us validate that our research feels like it's going, that it matches what we're expecting, and where does it not match what we're expecting. And if it doesn't match what we're expecting in a way that makes us feel concerned that the research is not valid, then that's one thing. And believe me, that happens.
You're listening to Voices of Customer Experience. If you want more CX content, visit us at worthix.com to download one of our customer experience ebooks, subscribe to our blog, and get our newsletter on the future of CX delivered to your inbox. What I'm hearing is that there's still a lot of intuition then that goes into this research. There's a bit of gut feeling, probably quite a lot of experience that tells you, hey, something isn't right here, or this is off, or is there also some sort of overlap that you're looking for? Is this project then, do you feel like a large part of it kind of rides on your ability as a market researcher?
At this point, I think it probably does ride on my ability as a market researcher. And the fact that I have been in market research in one way or another for, oh my gosh, over 35 years. So,
good for you. That's great.
And I've seen and done a whole lot, so I kind of get my spidey senses. But I don't want to leave people who don't have as much experience or maybe don't know how to do this with no advice.
That was my follow-up question.
That's right.
What would you recommend to someone with maybe a little bit less experience under their belt?
Yeah. So here's one of the things that I will say. First of all, you have to look very broad, and then you have to look very narrow. Okay. So it's like you don't want to always be up in the clouds looking at data. Sometimes you want to dig in on very specific things. So go find a few things to dig in on and really understand them in depth, but also kind of keep your eye on these broad trends, because when something starts to look like it's changing, that's a time when you want to go dig in somewhere else. The other thing I would say is, have a diverse group of people and respect that diversity. I mean, one of the things that I have encountered in running a data team has been that some of the more left brain thinkers are really, really perplexed by the right brain people and uncomfortable. So, and by uncomfortable, what I mean is they'll say things like, well, the data doesn't say that, and you can't prove causation. And, I think you've interpreted this a little bit over what it means. And, and to me, I say, well, okay, I want you to pull me back when I'm getting out in front of the data too much. But if we're going to make decisions, we're going to have to get out in front of the data a bit, because it isn't going to tell us everything that we need at this exact moment. We're going to have to use it strategically. And if it's the best information we have at the time and points us in a direction that, by the time you get to some of these strategic decisions, even a 0.5% of push in one direction or another can mean the difference between making it or breaking it for a whole company.
Sure,
and those are
absolutely.
the kinds of moments that we are, as business leaders, faced with, and as analysts and insight people, we're faced with those, 0.5% tipping points for our executives. And when it comes to things like customer experience, even more so, you're not going to have every bit of data, but you're going to have enough evidence for you to make a recommendation, which is probably going to be a little bit out of your comfort zone.
Sure.
And that's good. If it's like way out of your comfort zone, okay, maybe not.
Right. So going deeper with the experience index, you all used 4 tenets, correct? And we wanted to know a little more about those tenets and what they meant to you, like know me, respect me, delight me, make tech transparent, and speak in one voice. Can you kind of share with us what you all had in mind when you chose those 4 tenets?
Sure. Actually, what we did was we asked specific scenario questions. Okay, so the whole research is based on presenting a random group of consumers with scenarios in the retail category, the travel and hospitality category, the financial services category, and the media and entertainment category. And those scenarios were things like, while shopping in a large home improvement store, I use voice technology to ask my phone where to find a product, and it gives me a map inside the store with step-by-step directions on how to find what I was looking for. Okay, so like specific example. Now, when we took these examples and got the scores, and the scores were either a positive example like the one I just read you, or another example was, I never intended to go paperless, but my financial institution defaulted to not sending me paper statements. So I had to make a phone call to get it switched back. And so that's a negative. We call that an experience breaker, and the other one an experience maker. Okay. And then we asked for scores on the positive scale and on the negative scale, and then we weighted. Then we grouped everything into these tenants. And we're actually right about to take all the data from all the global research and do a cluster analysis to see if the groupings that we created are actually the groupings that we should have created. So, so we're going to keep working on this and keep researching and having better and better answers as we get more information. But the reason why we started with this is because they were natural groupings that we had already set out into the marketplace. Delight me at every turn, keep technology transparent, speak in one voice, and know me and respect me were the tenants. And so we grouped up these various scenarios into those tenants, and then we got the scores for the tenants so that we could give a bigger answer as to where we're having struggles and where we're doing better.
And you also said that Know Me, Respect Me scored the highest. I heard you say something about it may have changed now with all of the privacy issues that people are having. Is that still the case? Is it still, did it change at all? Have you redone the survey to see if that was any different?
We haven't redone the survey since the whole most recent wave. I won't say the wave because it's coming and going all the time. But that most recent wave has happened after this research was done. So the next time we see this research, we're probably going to recluster things and take the Know Me and the Respect Me tenants and separate them. Because putting them together is going to conflate the answer more than we'd like. We will probably see that drop from the Respect Me side. And that will be interesting. I also, independent of the Experience Index, ran a Future Trends survey literally 3 days before all of that press about Cambridge Analytica. And I specifically asked the question, how worried are you about your data being shared from social media sites? Wow. I'm just like, for some reason I asked that question 3 days prior. Got answers that were like, I'm not worried at all. Mm-hmm. And so I actually will probably refield that one as well and see how the impact of a media event causes those kinds of perceptions to shift quickly, because this is one of the things for customer experience that we're all dealing with in business, around how do we keep ahead of some sort of future experience breaker, especially in a big press, negative way. Yes. And this is one that we're most recently dealing with, but in the airline industry, about half a year ago, there was a whole big thing about, a person getting dragged off a plane and all this stuff. And so there have been variety of these customer experience storms or eruptions, maybe is a good way of putting it, given the Hawaiian volcano right now, that occur. And business leaders are thinking to themselves, holy cow, how do I stop that from happening when I've got all these different things to do and I don't know which one of them might erupt? I don't even have any, earthquake monitors anywhere. And that's really, what you're doing and what we're doing at Mary, is just, we're trying to create earthquake monitors so that we can tell if there's going to be something here, but also kind of help us pick the path of the best approach to spend limited resources. No company can do everything.
Not only that, not only with the problems or not only with the breakers, but what we have as well is people's expectations of what they're looking for in products change so quick. Like with the exact speed, something might happen on an airplane which causes an eruption, right? So there's a trigger, and then it starts this whole thing of the entire industry. But in other cases, what you have is that kind of just the organic progress and evolution that the disruptions of technology bring. And I mean, that was another question that I had for you, which I think is really important. And I don't even know if you're able to talk about this with us, but a company like Adobe, which is the company you work at, they're a massive company. They're all over the place. The amount of customers that Adobe has is huge. How is Adobe able to keep up with that speed of change? How does the company stay lean enough to know when it's time to pivot and say, oops, I got to run in the other direction because that's where my consumers are going? I know I went way off topic there, but is that some insight that you can provide?
You know, I don't actually think anyone in this company could give you an answer to that question besides, you know, the CEO and maybe, you know, some of the C-suite of the company. Mm-hmm. But let me just, you know, tell you that some of the research that we did in the Experience Index showed that that the 18 to 24-year-old group of people, the group that I like to call the crafters or the creators, but everyone else wants to call, everyone else wants to call them Gen Z, which I keep asking, does that mean that that's the end of all time because there's not going to be anything after
Are
Z?
we going back to
No, we're going to go to
next?
Z1.
I don't like that. Actually, I did get a very, very funny answer from one of those age group cohorts. And that was, what it means is that we'll stop naming generations after this. And I was like, ooh,
I would like that.
Good comeback. But anyway, they had an experience score of 221 out of 400 points. And the 25 to 34-year-olds had 211. So this was one of the biggest differences between cohorts of anything. And when we think about what's going on here, an 18 to 24-year-old has not yet entered their peak of being a consumer. They're in school or they're early on in their careers. The expectations are not as critical as they are when you get to the 25 to 34-year-olds, which have the most critical scores of any age group. And I thought, wow, okay, that's really interesting because what it's telling me, speaking to your point about that pace of change, is that as soon as you enter the consumer kind of mainstream age group, and you're having a family and buying a house and buying a car and doing all those things, you start getting really irritated about these negative experiences quickly. And the interesting thing is that the positive experiences didn't pull the scores up as much as the negative experience pulled the scores down. Mm-hmm. So it's really much more about not feeling happy about things. And they were in the tenets called keep technology transparent and speak in one voice. That's where we had the most breakage from the experience.
Going to the scores, is there a correlation between the high scores and loyalty and the low scores and attrition?
I don't know yet. That's a great question.
Okay.
I'm working on that. And I think that this is something that our whole industry is going to have to come up with answers around, including, you guys.
Yeah. It's what we're trying to do.
It's all a piece of the puzzle. I know, I get it, and I applaud you. So, I think that we will find that there are clusters of people who will break with a company over some things that other people won't break. And I'll give you an example of what we found in the 50 to 64 age range and the 65 and above, which had the highest experience scores. The reason why they had the highest experience scores is because they didn't have the most negative reaction to negative situations, scenarios. And we suspect that what we're seeing is the wear out factor that happens after you've tried and tried and tried to improve the experience and failed, that you're no longer vocal about it. You start to become, you either just don't send any signals and you just leave, or you accept a level of lower experiences than younger cohorts are willing to accept.
The expectations are different then.
It seems like they're just not as willing to be, vocal and negative about a bad experience. And that's really where the difference in the scores came from. It didn't come from the 50 to, and above being more delighted by an experience maker. It was that they were less negative about a breaker.
To learn more on how companies such as Verizon, TechCrunch, Blizzard Studios, Volvo, and FICO are using our artificial intelligence and behavioral analytics to measure customer decisions through voice of customer surveys, visit Worthix.com.
Mary and I had this discussion yesterday about empowered or entitled. And when you say that, that particular age group comes to expect negative experiences so they don't complain as much, I just wonder if, is it because that particular age group has, had hands-on experience where their expectations are different because they didn't have just, where you could just plug and play with every single thing, growing up. So if something is broken, then they know how to fix it, or they'll just use it as is, or they'll find another alternative. Whereas with the millennials or maybe the Gen Zs, when something's broken, there's an expectation because there's like this entitlement feeling that they have because it should work, because they're used to it working. Why is it not working? I'm going to move on. What do you think about?
It could be. I will point out some research from Japan that was fascinating, and I thought potentially wrong, and showed that we had bad data. Going back to my previous comments, what I found in Japan was a completely opposite scenario, where the older you get, the more likely you are to vocally complain about a bad experience.
I could see that.
It's a cultural attribute as well that could actually change the results of your data.
Yeah, and so in France, people were a lot less likely to complain overall than any other country we surveyed. And in Japan, the experience scores were the lowest of any country.
Interesting.
And, even though Japan is ahead in a lot of experiences, they have even higher standards. And so there's a lot more work to be done to understand exactly what's underneath these findings, to distinguish the cultural from the generational difference, from the things that businesses actually have created, as far as, almost like the river running over the stones, and so, they become smooth over time.
Right, sure.
with enough current over these stones, we're all kind of smoothed off on the edges and no longer, as likely to get angry as we used to be. And I don't know which one it is. Those are all pieces of future research that we're finding from what we've done so far.
Yeah, you mentioned that 3 days prior to the Cambridge Analytica situation, you sent out a research asking about some future trends. Were you able to identify any future trends that companies should place on their radar?
Oh yeah. We had a great time. We did an hour-long session at our customer event that we call Adobe Summit. And every year for the last 4 years, I've done a future trends report. And in that future trend report, we have all kinds of great findings. And I can make that available to you guys to put up on the notes on your website.
Sure,
yeah.
That'd be great.
But basically, we asked about things like blockchain, we asked about AI and virtual reality. I mean, I'll give you one that I thought was really interesting. And that was, and I'm happy to come back and do a whole future trends podcast. But anyway,
wonderful.
The one of them that was really interesting was, this whole idea between virtual reality and augmented reality. You hear a lot of people saying that they think augmented reality is going to be bigger and take off faster, because it's really, taking your mobile device that you already have and putting an app on it that allows you to use the camera and all that stuff, kind of Pokemon Go-ish. And that, screens on cars are going to have pop-up displays on them. That's all augmented reality. And then you've got virtual reality. And one of the things that I saw in the data was a huge number of people have already had a virtual reality experience. I was shocked. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And when I started digging into it and I asked another question about how much they'd be willing to pay for a virtual reality experience, it was around $20 to $30 per experience. Now pair that up with a lack of tenants in malls across America and lots of mall space, and you have the perfect future VR entertainment explosion ready to happen. And I think in the future, VR will take off faster because we will go to places that are close to us, but they're more destination things to do, and have an amazing experience, be on a roller coaster or fly through the Grand Canyon or whatever we're going to do.
All in your local mall.
In your local mall. Yeah, that's what I see coming. And I think that given that the technology is here, the desire is here, the money is willing to spend for entertainment, people are not doing the same kind of entertainment they were, where they're just sitting and watching television for hours and hours at a time. They're either binge watching doing that, or they're, watching movies or doing something else. They're not just linear TV kind of media entertainment. So for that industry, I think that and the whole like retail closures and creating a lot of mall space, and the fact that nobody's going to the malls because the anchors are closed is like a perfect storm for the malls to offer these startups a very good experience and low price for them to get the rent. And I went to a place called The Void at Downtown Disney in Anaheim. It's a company that's based out of Utah, which is where I'm based, and that's why I knew about it. And I strapped on the backpack and put on the headset and took my 11-year-old son, and we became stormtroopers and went into Star Wars.
Wow.
And we were there for a half hour.
How
and
fun.
It was unbelievable. If you're in business at all, like, go do that and write it off, because if you want to really understand what the future is, that's kind of one of those things that really fits together nicely in terms of the puzzle pieces for me. So that's the kind of stuff I do in Future Watch. You can tell I took a little bit of data and a whole lot of intuition and put it all together.
Sounds great. Well, you heard it here first. So if somebody comes up with that mall idea, we heard it here first with Tamara Gaffney. Okay. Well, since we're wrapping up here, one thing that we did want to hear is another reason we started this podcast is to be able to inspire people who are in the CX industries. CX is still so young. The customer experience, it's been around for maybe 15 years tops. And a lot of people feel like they don't get the recognition or the visibility, and they don't feel like their projects maybe get the airtime or even the financing that other departments within their company gets. And in your case, Tamara, where you've had such a successful venture with customer experience, is there something that you would recommend, something that you'd tell people who are maybe getting started in customer experience? I don't know, maybe some advice on what they should do to be able to succeed and feel more successful, really?
Well, that's a great question, and let me start with the fact is that customer experience and having that in your job title is the place to be right now. So kudos to anyone who is already there. And wait for everybody else to change their titles to have that, because it is so hot and important. But having said that, every job has a certain level of frustration with not being able to get stuff done or get enough resources. I think from my seat at Adobe, I think it's really, really important to try and figure out how to speak to the business leaders about what value the things you intend to do or need to do have, and to identify the stakeholders for the value proposition. And sometimes that value proposition is going to require, like we talked about at the beginning, some data with some insights and some intuition all mixed together that is presented in story form to executive leadership that explains to them. And I had a business school professor who had said this, and it's always stuck in my mind, either presents a vision or a nightmare. And
Sure.
whichever way can be very motivating. but if it is something that you can present to them that they suddenly see happening and can kind of draw a lot of correlation to how it's going to impact the business, then that's going to make for a better ability to go ahead and get that kind of resourcing for the projects. And every big company I know, including my own, has a huge budget and a lot of people, but not nearly enough to do everything we need to do. So it's all a matter of priorities and figuring out where we're going to put our money. So of course, the other thing I would say is keep your eye on the Experience Index and join the Experience League, which we didn't talk about yet, but I'll just put a quick plug in.
That was the next one, yeah.
The Experience League is a community that we are starting up that we just announced, where folks who are involved in creating digital experiences and what we call experience makers, and you may have CX in your title or not, but most everyone is involved in creating experiences in some way, shape, or form. So we are creating an environment for helping folks do what they need to do, learn what they need to learn, get access to the kind of data that they can use to make their business cases. And that is our initiative. It's just, again, another baby program that just launched in March. So keep an eye on all of that stuff as well.
We definitely will.
We're trying to help. we love our customers.
That's right. It starts with the customer. That's absolutely right. Well, thank you so much, Tamara, for your time. We appreciate your insights, and we look forward to sharing them.
Great. Thank you for having me on. I'd love to come back whenever you want.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week to hear from Peter Fader, author of Customer Centricity and professor of marketing at the Wharton School, to discuss customer centricity.
Voices of Customer Experience is brought to you by Worthix. This podcast is produced by Crystal Garrett, Mary Drumond, and edited by Anthony Sledge. To hear more and subscribe, go to worthix.com to get more material.